Chair of the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach, and I hereby call this special meeting to order at 5 o'clock on the 21st day of February 2023. In accordance with the schedule of school board meetings approved by the school board at their January 10th, 2023 organizational regular meeting, and pursuant to Bylaw 146 and Virginia Code 2.2-3707, the school board will hold a special meeting on Tuesday, February 21st, 2023 at 5 o'clock p.m. at the Holland Road Annex, 2323 Holland Road, Virginia Beach, Virginia, 23453 in the Einstein Lab. The purpose of this special meeting is for fiscal year 2023-24 school board proposed operating budget and fiscal year 2023-24 through fiscal year 2028-29 capital improvement program. Discussion by school board and school administration. Members of the public will be able to observe the special school board meeting through live streaming or schoolboard.vbschools.com/meeting/live, broadcast on VBTV Channel 47 and on Zoom. Thank you to those who have joined us in person and online. Madam Clerk, will you please announce those school board members in attendance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Present in the Holland Road Annex Einstein Lab is Chair Riggs, Vice Chair Weems, Miss Anderson, Miss Brown, Mr. Callen, Miss Franklin, Miss Manning, Miss Morton, Miss Melnick, and Miss Owens.
Please join me now in observing a moment of silence. Please stand as you are able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The adoption of the agenda. Are there any modifications to the agenda as presented? Hearing none, I call for a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Bev Anderson, do I have a second? Mike Callen. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I call for a vote to approve the agenda as presented. All in favor, please raise your hands.
Madam Chair, we have 10 ayes. The motion did pass.
Thank you. We're on number 4, discussion school board budget worksheet for the fiscal year 2023-24 proposed operating budget and the capital improvement program for fiscal year 2023-24 through fiscal year 2028-29. Ms. Crystal Pate, our Chief Financial Officer.
Good evening, Chairwoman Riggs, Vice Chairwoman Weems, school board members, Dr. Spence. This evening, I'm going to start with where we are with the budget update as of right now. I'll then turn the presentation over to Ms. Woodhouse, who will provide you a summarization of a lot of the compensation you've already seen, but it's probably something that she'll present to you again just to make sure you have no additional questions. And then the presentation will be sent to Mr. Freeman for him to go over this capital improvement program. So as you know, General Assembly went through crossover. We received a calc tool from the Virginia Department of Education on February 16th, where each House and Senate Appropriations Committee adopted separate changes to the amended 22-24 biennial budget as introduced by Governor Youngkin. The House version came in about a little over $4 million more than the governor's budget, and the Senate version came in at about a little over $30 million more than the governor's budget. So as you know, neither of these recommendations are final. The conference committee will make the final recommendations after trying to resolve the differences between both bodies. And so with that said, we completed a revised budget balancing scenario to take the most conservative approach, which is using the House version, which gives us a little over $4 million from where we were the last time we presented to you. With this additional $4 million and some additional adjustments, we are working to, we have balanced the budget to provide option one for the instructional scale. And so I will show you that budget balancing and let you know the adjustments that we made. Sorry, this is probably smaller, but there's just a lot of information. Again, we added a little over $4 million to what we were working with as new revenue, so now it's starting at a little over $58 million. We did fund option one of the instructional pay scale, so you'll see that now at $37.2 million. The unified compensation study remains the same. We also funded this option two of the new professional pay scale that Ms. Woodhouse presented to you last week, and we'll review again with you this evening. We removed the 1% bonus. That bonus was in the governor's introduced budget. It's not in the House version, so we have removed it at this point, trying to stay along with the House version. We decreased the funding for allowances for advanced degrees. It's down to a little over $1 million now. We remained stable with the bachelor's degree assistance. That's the final phase in, so we did keep that intact. And then we decreased funding for site-assigned subs. We decreased that down a little bit of money, so that try to make up that difference in order to fund option one. You will also see most of the remaining information is what you saw at the last presentation. And at the end of this, remember, there was about $2.7 million that we had left over that was going into the instructional pay scale. So obviously that probably part of that went into the new pay scale that we're trying to fund for the professional pay scale, and then also the remaining of it went into the option one for the instructional pay scale. So the next three slides, I'm not going to read those to you. These are questions that we received beginning Friday and a few over the weekend. We just wanted you to have them to let you know what we did receive. We have responded to those as far as we have been able to keep up with them. So everyone should have received, the full board should have received responses for these questions. So we ask that if you review them, if you feel like you did not receive a response, please let us know and we can certainly get back with you on that. But I'm not going to read all these because we did respond via email to the full board. So there's about 3 pages of those, and so I'm just putting those out there for you. Okay, and that's all I have for you this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Woodhouse and let her review compensation, and certainly we'll be taking questions at the end of this session.
Thank you.
All righty. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Riggs, Vice Chair Weems, school board members, and Dr. Spence. This afternoon, as part of the HR update, we wanted to be able to address some of the questions that we received directly as part of the either the Siegel study or any other recommendations that were made made to HR. So I have about 6 slides that will go into a little further detail around the questions that we had, and also will help our viewing audience. So for the first question, which probably has caused the most confusion, not just for the board, but for the many who also emailed us in our department, they wanted to know why the professional level 2 pay grade, which is on the unified scale, versus the instructional teacher pay scale, which was the most advantageous option? Because one group was advocating for option 1 and another group advocating for option 2, which caused some confusion. So the response was that we do understand that there is some confusion regarding the selection of options for the teacher scale and the proposed new professional level 2 pay grade shared this past Tuesday with the school board in the during workshop. As it relates to the request for support, you are receiving from the teachers and also occupational therapists, behavioral intervention specialists, and others. Both groups are asking that you support the most advantageous option for their respective groups. So for the professional level 2 pay grade, of the 2 options presented for further discussion by administration, this new pay grade, option 2, is the most advantageous. For teachers and those on the instructional scale, Option one, which you just heard this evening from Ms. Pate, from the compensation study is the most advantageous. So the two groups are on two different pay scales. We currently have two different pay scales. The teachers are on the instructional experience-based step pay scale, and the occupational therapists and others are on the unified experience-based step pay scale. So these options for the proposed level two pay scales were not discussed with the school board as a part of the compensation study, but rather as a new possibility to address a different employee group's concerns within the budget. And just to further clarify, here are the slides that we shared through the presentation for the professional level two pay grade, which again was a new proposed pay grade, which includes occupational therapists, physical therapists, behavioral intervention specialists, positive behavior intervention specialists, support specialists, school psychologists, and school social workers. Option two is the most advantageous plan, and that the values in the last column titled Employee Dollar Increase illustrates the impact on this group's annual salary. The next question that was actually asked during the workshop was information around professional level two, the new pay grade, and then who would be included on the new pay grade, the degree requirements, and how many current vacancies we have for each position, the exact percentages. And so, as you can see in the chart shown, it identifies the positions on the new pay grade, their degree requirements, and in some cases, there's discussion around where maybe currently a bachelor's degree is the requirement and or a master's degree, that could actually change and become a master's degree and or a doctorate degree. And so, for instance, if you look at the occupational therapist, right now it's a bachelor's degree, but there is discussion that is going to change, and that requirement has increased and will become a master's degree requirement. As you can also see in this chart with our school psychologists, that's where we have and have seen for some time the largest number of vacancies with this particular group. Also, there's some additional notes just to further clarify some of the requirements and just other notes that we wanted you to be aware around this particular group of employees. So for the teachers, just to further re-indicate to you that the most advantageous plan is option one, which does provide a 1.5% between each step. So from step one through, in this case, we've displayed 43 years. The values in the last column titled current BA lane for bachelor's degree versus proposed bachelor's lane in both documents illustrate the impact on the teacher's annual salary. The next question we received was on the teacher salary scale for educational allowances. Is there a chart for teacher pay for the master's lane for options one and or two? And so the response on this slide is the proposed target educational allowances for degrees. Rather than having a master or doctorate lane, we, Virginia Beach City Public Schools, provides an allowance that is added to the teacher's base salary. And then to calculate the new salary, you would take the base pay and add the allowance to any year of experience. With the upcoming school year, we had already discussed in our office to display all teacher work calendars, schedules, pay scales with columns that will address. In the first column would be the base salary, and then if you had a master's allowance, the base salary plus master's allowance, base salary plus master's plus 30 for advanced certificate allowance, as well as the base salary for doctorate allowance. We do have that information currently in our office, and our staffing specialists, HR staffing specialists, share and go over that information when they're making a job offer to a candidate. But we are going to, beginning with this upcoming school year, display all of that information so any candidate can see it at a glance. The next question we received was around the unified pay scale. And can the administration please identify the value of any planned pay increases for division staff identified in the Virginia Department of Education directory? First and foremost, I do want to bring to the board's attention, because this question came in kind of late last night, we did not have the opportunity to pull a example pay scale for an administrator. In that scale, it had various directors, executive directors, and the likes. This particular slide was actually in the Siegel presentation. And so because we had this one readily available, we put this information here, but we will come back and address the question with a scale that more aligned with directors and or above. So the unified pay scale includes all employees who do not fall on the instructional pay scale. Pay increases are based on the employee's assigned pay grade and the employee's credible years of experience. In the chart shown on this slide is an example of pay grade 10 on the unified pay scale. For an example, an employee on pay grade 10 with 5 years of experience currently makes $17.65 per hour. On the redesigned scale, the same employee would make $18.47 per hour, which is an increase of approximately 82 cents or 4.65%. And then it follows kind of the same pattern. If you're on 10 years, if you have 10 years of experience, you would see an increase of $1.59 per hour, approximately 8.77%. For 20 years of experience, an increase of $1.63 or 7.81%. And for 30 years of experience, an employee would see an increase of 43 cents or $1.71%. So you're probably wondering, why is it that someone with 30 years of experience would receive or see less of an increase? Just to be reminded, in the Siegel study presentation, unlike the teacher scale, Siegel stayed within the minimums and the maximums of the current scale. So in order to level out the scale by putting the 1.3% between each step, those in the beginning of the scale would receive a little larger of an increase, and those basically with more years of experience would still see an increase, but it would be smaller in comparison to someone who had fewer years. And so I wanted to bring that to your attention because, again, with the unified, there was the cap on the maximums, whereas we did not want to do that with the teacher scale because we wanted teachers to see a bigger increase in their salaries. And that was the questions that this group received. And many of you had already received an email response, but we thought for the viewing audience who had very similar questions, that it was best to put it all on the slide so they'll have that information that they can go back and review. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Friedman, and then, of course, at the end,
We're gonna
stand ready with
stop for a
questions. Oh, you want to do
second.
questions first?
It's-
Okay.
Let's take the questions now
Okay.
for these presentations, and then we'll turn it over to Mr. Freeman, okay? So we'll start with any questions that anybody has. Please raise your hand, Ms. Martin, and then Ms. Owens, and then Ms. Brown.
Do this right. Okay, is that on? Okay. I had a question on slide 12 on the teacher salary scale and the allowances.
Slide 12.
If a doctorate is required for the position, do they get the allowance?
For the teacher scale, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then if a teacher then moves into an administrative position and has the advanced degree, do they get the allowance or does that go away?
It depends on the requirement of the position. So most of our administrative positions require a master's degree. And so with moving from the teacher scale to the unified scale, they typically will see an increase in salary, so then they lose the master's allowance.
Okay.
But if they have a master's plus 30 or doctorates, then yes, they would pick up that additional allowance again.
Okay, that does help me understand some of the pay rates that I'm seeing on the administrative side. My other question is on the OT and PT professional level pay. There are significant increases in option 2, which I can support. However, I'm wondering, do we have a mentoring program for experienced OT, PT staff to mentor newer staff members? To me, that would justify this kind of mid-career boost.
Dr. Rogers, I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Rogers.
Thank you.
So I'll speak directly to the OT and PTs. We have about 21 and 22, and we have some that are more senior. We do have a lead OT that works directly with them to serve as a mentorship capacity. We also have coordinators, and then, of course, we have our director of OPEC who serves as a mentor for those staff.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers.
Ms. Owens? Thank you. And this isn't, not a direct question from the information we've been given, but kind of based on the new budget balancing option that we were presented today with some decrease in funding for the site-assigned substitutes to make it work. I was wondering if there is an option for doing contracting or contracting out substitute staff members. Either, I don't know if it's an option that's available locally. I know that other divisions elsewhere have done it. And would it be more cost-effective, or even if it's equally cost-effective, would that time savings help us move our HR processing forward? And so I was hoping if anybody knew. If you don't know, it's okay.
Actually, HR, myself, and several members of our staff had the opportunity to meet with a couple of organizations that were referred to us from some of our neighboring divisions. And so we definitely explored the opportunity of looking at a substitute management company. We were very impressed with their data, their fill rates. In looking at the budget and kind of crunching numbers and knowing that our priority was to our teachers, the decision was made in our department to hold off in making that recommendation and maybe look at it as a consideration for next year. We do know filling our sub vacancies continue to be a challenge. We've been monitoring the numbers very closely along with the Department of School Leadership. Most days are great days and some days are not so great. But we definitely did not put it off the table, only delayed making that recommendation for this particular budget season. So we'll continue to have that conversation and see if that is something we want to bring forward in the future.
Okay. And then kind of, I guess, on that same vein, have we looked at, or is there opportunity for contracting out like OT, PT staff? And does that make sense financially or to our district?
Yeah, I was about to say, and I can counter, but
Thank you. We do contract out, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure whether Ronnie is on the call or not, but I know we have at least 2, if I'm not mistaken, that we contract out because we just can't find enough to fill the need. Now, in terms of whether it's more cost-effective or not, I think we'd have to go to the drawing board to see what the cost implications are. For example, you would not have the cost associated with health benefits because we do not pay those for the contracted staff. But, per dollar per dollar, I guess hour per hour, the cost is a little different there. So we'd have to weigh that out.
Okay, thank you. And if that's something that, obviously maybe not for this budget cycle, but that we could look at and have just some information to consider for future budget cycles. And I will throw out there that I am not suggesting that we lay off or do anything with our OTPT staff that we have, but if it's a cost-effective transition for new hiring, I want us to be able to consider all options.
Most definitely.
So, Ms. Owens, let me just ask, is it just those two particular groups that you're curious about? Because, you know, there's contracted services available for any array of employee groups.
It's interesting. You know, the substitutes were the main ones that I had been hearing about other divisions doing things that were mainly helping to fill those slots more effectively, and then I didn't know how cost effective it was. It hadn't really dawned on me until this budget season that we were doing some contracting to fill some of the OTPT, and so maybe if I had a list of the other positions that would be, you know, worth considering or that would fit that bill. I mean, I'm sure we could contract everything from teachers all the way down, but if it's an option that could be cost effective, I think it's worth having on the table for next budget season just to weigh.
Okay.
Thanks.
Ms. Brown?
Thank you for this. So I just wanted to go back to the unified pay scale here. Does this include this pay rate, our food service workers, our custodial staff, bus drivers' assistants, or is that a different chart?
That's actually a different
Okay.
pay scale. Yes, ma'am. So currently, as of now, those groups are on the unified step 5 scale. As part of the Siegel presentation was to move them up 2 additional steps, which would move them to the unified pay grade scale 7. And so that is separate to what I'm using here as a general example. So for the unified schedule, right now we have U5 all the way through U28. So next year it would be U7. U7 now would be our lowest pay scale on the unified through unified 28, scale 28.
Okay. And I'm just gonna go ahead and advocate at this point. In 2026, when minimum wage goes up to about $15 an hour, I have a feeling we're gonna be having trouble getting quality custodians, bus drivers, assistants, and food service workers when we're paying them close to minimum wage. As somebody who has been a single parent in a near minimum wage job before, I think that, you know, maybe we should be looking at that a little bit more. And then I don't know if my other question is for you or Crystal, but I had sent a link from the Virginia Department of Education. There's 193 positions, or rather 192 positions, because superintendent is one of those. Could you please tell me what the dollar value of any pay increases this year are for those 192 positions?
So I could not tell you for the 192 positions because each of those positions fall on a different unified scale.
Okay.
On top of that, you have to factor in the credible years of experience. So we would have to first identify what scale they're on, what their credible years of experience, what their current pay is, and then what it would be with the new proposed increase. And so I could not just calculate that very easily or readily available. It would be similar, very similar to what you will see with the unified example for step 10, recognizing each has a different minimum and maximum amount, but then you would then again take a look at where they are currently, the 1.3%, 32% between each step, and then be able to identify where they are next year. And the example is very similar still to even the step 10 example that I shared, where if you're basically between the years of 5 to 20, you will see a bigger increase. As you get to years 21, meaning credible years of experience, 21 and above, your percent increase gets smaller. And so that's what I was preferencing earlier. and that I can pull one of our scales from those groups and show you another example. But I led off with this one because it was already available.
Okay, all right,
Yes,
thank you,
ma'am.
I
And I can
appreciate it.
send that, follow up with that in the
Thank you.
email. Yes, ma'am. And may I too add, just so you know, that's one of the reasons why we've really advocated for those three employee groups that you mentioned, our lowest paid workers. And we are definitely closely monitoring them so that we can ensure that they meet the minimum wage requirements prior to 2026. And you'll see that as we have further conversations next year and in future years. You're welcome.
Ms. Manning?
Thank you for answering all my questions so far. On the unified scale, anyone that was in any position that was indicated at or above market condition from the Siegel study, are any of those positions that were at or above market conditions, are they in the budget to get a salary increase at all?
They are. Everyone who is on the unified scale is scheduled to receive an increase. Depending upon their years of experience and where they fall on the scale will determine what that percentage is. So very similar, like I said, to the example here, you will find that those who have more years in the division, unlike the teacher scale, will see a smaller increase, whereas our teachers will see a larger increase. And that is because with the unified scale, when the adjustment was made to the 1.32% between steps, to balance that out, some of the other percent increases that were larger went lower. And so when you average it out, although it's even increments between steps, those with more years of experience, hence, will see a smaller increase.
But if they're already above market value, why are we giving them more money?
So I think
I'll defer that one
structurally,
to-
this continues to be the question we're getting, and we're trying to figure out a way to communicate this as clearly as we can. But structurally, our employees are on a scale. And that scale is predicated upon step increases between each year of experience. And so if you look, and go back to this example, if you could go back to slide 13.
Yes, sir.
If you look at how these scales work, and so the scales have different pay grades depending on the position, right? So this is an example of a pay grade 10 part of the unified scale. So you're going to go from, the way we've structured it in our recommendation is, we have right now U5, which is unified 5. We would go up to U7, we would eliminate 5 and 6. Those would no longer exist because we would surpass the amount of money in those two scales. So you'd start at U7, you'd go up to, I think the last one was 28.
Yes, sir.
And then, so U7 would have a list of 0 to 30. And then there would be a salary next to, or an hourly rate next to each of those. And then that would be intentionally 1.3% between each of those. And then you would, for U20, you would have the same exact thing. You'd have years of experience, you'd have the rate next to that, and then you'd have a 1.3% increase between each of those years of experience. So the idea is you're getting the scale in order so that no matter what else happens, if you go from 1 year of experience to the next year of experience, you're going to get a 1.3% increase. The adjustment to the instructional scale is a 1.5% increase. That's the difference between the two recommendations that came from the compensation study. So fully funding the unified scale, you are in fact adjusting it to be 1.3% between each step. Fully funding the instructional scale, you're adjusting it to be 1.5% between each step of a particular pay grade. So for your question, there could be 4 or 5 different employee groups within a particular pay grade. One of those groups might be above market, another one of those groups might be below market. Both of them might be on the same pay grade. And so you're going to see the adjustment to the pay grade, which is going to be a 1.3% increase between each step. And the reason that then gives some people a raise is, as you notice over here on the left-hand column, there was some inconsistency between steps. And so there were higher step increments in this particular example towards the end of the scale, lower increments towards the beginning of the scale, and we're trying to make that consistent. So in all cases, employees on both scales are going to receive some compensation increase. It is going to vary depending on their year of experience on the pay grade that they're on. And so there's not a way, there isn't a way to say you're not gonna get a raise if we're adjusting the pay scales. The way maybe in the future to think about it is, you're automatically gonna get a pay increase based on the 1.3% step increase. So just on an annual basis, essentially, you're gonna get a step increase. That's how the scales are designed. And then if you were to apply a future raise to that, you would say, well, we're gonna do a 4% raise. That would be a 4% to everything on the scale, from 0 all the way up to the end of scale. And that 4% would also then have to calculate in the additional 1.3% between those. And so we're gonna have to give you the costs for those. So if you then came back and said, well, we don't want, whatever, pick it. We don't want administrators to get a raise. We would have to go through every pay grade on the unified scale where administrators were living, and we would have to apply the 1.3% step increase, but not the 4% raise. So I don't know if that's helping, but that's how pay scales are basically built. They're built so there's an automatic increase on an annual basis. What the compensation study reflected, and then what I think our folks have been saying for a while, is you need to get those incrementally level between each step of experience. That will ultimately provide continuity of growth in salary over time, so that you're going to see the top end make more money over time than the bottom end, and there will be less compression towards the middle. And then the bit about raises after that goes back to, okay, so where do you want to apply a raise? And you could do it. You just have to recognize that then within that pay scale, so let's say you said, well, we're going to do a U25 group, and we don't want anybody in U25 to get a pay raise. That means that we would adjust all of the numbers for U24, all of the numbers for U26, and nobody in U25, well, maybe all the way up you wouldn't adjust, but that would mean you would adjust. So what you would end up with is people below U25 getting closer to the U25 pay scale. So you're building in a compression between the pay scales, or between the pay grades. You're building in a compression. The challenges that the board faces when you build a compression between the pay grades is ultimately you could have one pay grade, non-administrative, now making more than the administrative pay grades, and then and if that's the board's compensation philosophy, that's okay. You just have to recognize you're not going to find people to go into administrative positions when you begin to do that. So that's a good conversation to have, but this particular conversation is really not so much about a raise as it is about adjusting the scales to get to the incremental step increase being leveled out between each pay step on a pay grade, between each year of experience on a pay grade, and doing it across both scales. And just to also be clear, when we go back to that professional level 2, that is on the unified scale. It is just a new pay grade on the unified scale. And so the goal would be the same there. You'd have 0 to 30, and you'd have an incremental step increase between each of those years of experience. So does that help?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think Mr. Mira might be happy to hear that the steps are more uniform.
Yes,
something
yes.
that he would.
We've been trying to get there for a while.
But, and this goes back to when we had our retreat and we were talking about what we wanted to come out of this study. And I said, I want to find a way to have more performance-based compensation. And unfortunately, I didn't get any of that information from Siegel. It was all based upon years of service, which was something that I personally wanted to see if there were any other alternatives because of this, because I think that there are certain employees, especially those who are hard to hire, or who are below market conditions, that need to be compensated differently. So that's my frustration with this setup. So I appreciate the explanation, though. My second and third questions kind of go together. On the new budget balancing option that was just presented, I'm just trying to take it all in, and I'm trying to figure out where all the funds came from to give that option one instead of option two. It looks like we're taking almost $1.9 million away from the increased allowance for advanced degrees. Is that correct?
No, I mean, I think,
Because in our Sion, it says increased allowance for advanced degrees, 2.9 million, and now it's only 1 million?
that's correct, we are. We
So that's
reduced
kind of
it. We
taking away
reduced-
from the teacher pot to put into the teacher
We
pot.
we reduced it by 50%. It's a phase-in, so instead of phasing it in, what we originally presented in order to try to get to option one, only trying to look at the $4 million extra that we have at the House side. And that's an estimate. That's all we have to go on at this point to be conservative. Certainly, we hope that there would be more money available coming out of General Assembly, and certainly that'll be one of the things that we take care of. But we are just trying to balance within that piece. And at one point, we were trying to decide whether we were going to leave the bachelor's piece in or try to, because that's the last phase in for that. But we left that in and then took it out of the other piece.
Okay. And I didn't see on your new budget balancing option, the professional pay scale suggestion that you had made.
It should be the third line down. It's 1,130,095.
Oh, that's new instructional level
Level
pay
pay
grade?
scale. That was the option 2 of the new professional pay scale.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, great. Okay, I see that now. Okay, all right. And then, my last question for right now, in the line item budget, it has, 7 line items that say transfer to other school funds, but it doesn't, it says unspecified. Those value anywhere from 4 million, 5 million, 1 million. What are those?
There are transfers into various funds that we have. For example, the athletic fund receives a transfer from the operating budget. There's transfers from the operating fund to grant funds that require a local match. So we do have transfers within, there's a transfer to the risk management fund. So those, we can give you a complete list of those,
Yeah.
but those are what they're like, because we do transfers from the operating budget into those various funds, but we'll get you a list of those.
Yeah, if you could, because I saw one of them was specified, it said pre-K program, but the other ones were not specified.
We'll get you that list.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Franklin?
Actually, Dr. Spence clarified my question pretty readily, but I wanted to just make sure I understood again. So the Segal study basically leveled us out so that there was much more of a steady incremental increase. And because we were also missing in those particular years, especially because it was so kind of wonky with some of the increases. So basically, we are leveling out because we're also seeing during those years that we're seeing the biggest attrition, right? I mean, in terms of.
In the
Yeah.
0 to 5 years, I think.
Well, generally speaking, in the field, you're gonna find that 0 to 5 years is your largest attrition for pretty much every business field you're in.
Sure.
And that certainly has always been the case in education. And, right, if you look on this scale and you look on the teacher scale, you'd see the same thing. The lowest increments between steps was in the 0 to 5 years.
Right,
So this
yeah.
will improve in the early years for folks on both unified and instructional scales. It will improve the step increment between years. Because you're making bigger adjustments down at the bottom, that actually increases adjustments in the middle, so they
Sure.
actually get bigger adjustments.
Yes,
And then because we level out towards the end, the adjustments tend to go back down, as Cheryl
Sure.
was sort of explaining. But yeah, you'll see larger incremental increases, generally towards the front of the scale.
Right, because that's really where we needed to shore up, maybe.
It will help, and as, remember, one of the Siegel compensation study's goals was to meet the board's compensation philosophy, which was to get to, that was the first thing they did with you all, and it was to get to number one in the region for each of the increments that we sort of look at every year when we look at salaries, which was 0 years, so entry, 5 years, 10 years, 15, and 20, right? So looking at those and wanting to be at the top. We were doing well at entry and fairly well later in the scale, but it was the middle years, 5, 10, 15, and 20, that we weren't way behind in the region. So what this ultimately will do, and of course, I mean, not to be the bearer of some bad news, the other divisions are not gonna be sitting still this year. I mean, they're
Sure,
going to be
yeah.
giving pay increases as well. But this will, catch us up rather, I hope rather dramatically, in terms of meeting the board's compensation philosophy.
And Ms. Woodhouse, I mean, you and the HR team have done just a dynamic job this year, getting the word out there, with the buses and the fairs. So, in your opinion, I mean, do you feel like that this is going to make your job easier? Trying to,
Well, I would say all the research that I'm reading, the HR field apparently is one in high demand here lately. I do believe it will be very helpful. I think our current employees will tell you that improving our scales and having those incremental steps is where we've been trying to move to for some time. And it will be a drastic increase for many of our employees. So I do believe that, along with the board support of compensating our lowest wage employees, and then some of the other recruitment and retention activities that we have in place, I do believe will be very helpful. Dr. Spence made a very valid point when he said the study is wonderful should our neighboring divisions not make any changes. And of course, I very closely monitor those. But I do believe still that it definitely puts us at the competitive side of things. And then, I try to remind everyone, we have so much that we offer here in Virginia Beach. And so when you look at our academy programs and what we've been able to do with our benefits and reducing those out-of-pocket costs for our employees, all the athletic programs and just the different programs and supports we have in Virginia Beach, without a doubt, we are a sought-after school division. And I think that shows, even though we have some vacancies, we are not in such dire straits as some of our neighboring divisions. So I think this will only continue to further enhance the opportunity and make our recruitment efforts hopefully even stronger.
I did have a question, and you might have addressed this in the past, but why is it that we are faster out of the gate with our budget recommendation than some other divisions? I can't remember if that's, does that have to do with our relationship with city council and their budget season?
I don't know that I have a great answer for you, and we traditionally stay with the schedule we've stayed for years. I will tell you, and I really haven't spoken with Dr. Spence about but we have seen where other divisions come out even quicker than us, way quicker than us. We do follow city council's schedule pretty closely because we do have to present to them. So we do try to maintain that, and we try to wait for the General Assembly, some action prior to that, because we do work off the governor's introduced budget. We try to wait to see some of that come through before we actually, because otherwise we're going to be making changes, especially in a year like this year where we're seeing drastic differences between House and Senate. So we try to look at that and make sure we can bring our positions in at a proper time where HR has gotten everything loaded and we're bringing in actuals, even though we know there's some differences down the road. So it's just, we try to time it as best we can.
Just felt like last year, we've really got a smack in the face because of our timing, so to speak. So I was just curious if that's adjustable.
Ms. Weems? Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you, Ms. Woodhouse and Crystal, for all your hard work. And this definitely does what we had talked about, I guess, last summer, in our retreat, to really concentrate on the compensation and getting these scales right. So I feel like this is deja vu, because I feel like we've been here so many times since I've been on the board trying to get this right, and we've done bits and pieces of it. So Ms. Woodhouse, by adjusting the pay scales with this incremental, consistent step, are we good to go now? And then we just, I mean, is this, or are we gonna have to readjust next year and readjust, or is this pretty much sets up with what we wanted to do, and then we just keep adding on to it, or is that?
Definitely, this is a good start. We have to continue to monitor what our neighboring districts are doing. And I think we'll have to take into account the one challenge was with our teacher scale, we did not adjust the entry level. And so in order to be able to make the package more affordable with the 1.5% increase, we then will need to take a look at adjusting our entry level. And so there'll always be
Right, right.
recommendations for consideration coming from HR to Dr. Spence and the full leadership team and to the board. I think we're just going to find ourselves always in a situation where compensation is a part of the discussion.
But this gives us, like, on that good base, we're leveled
just-
out, we're not gonna have to deal with major compression issues. And so-
Correct.
Okay, so this
Correct.
does exactly what we've been trying to do for a long time.
Correct. Just so you know, the HR team, including myself, we're doing backflips over this proposal. Mine in spirit, not necessarily physically, but we do feel as if this is an extremely strong starting point for
Right.
our compensation plan, and I think our employees would agree. So I am extremely pleased, and you're absolutely correct. Mr. Mira, when he retired, said to me,
Yeah.
fix those scales, fix
Yeah,
those scales,
yeah.
fix those scales. It's, I'm gonna text him. I
Yeah.
think we got it.
Okay, good. Yeah, he is. And I can teach you how to do some flips. Come to my PE class. We'll work on that. Okay, thank you, Ms. Woodhouse.
Ms. Owens?
And this is maybe not, again, a specific line item, but on our slide 3, I did notice that we had increased graduation expenses, and I'm sure that there's a number of reasons why we might have those. I'm curious if we know, are we getting any kind of special deal situation with the convention center? Is the city making a profit off of our graduations? And is that something we need to talk about? We don't
What I'm
charge
gonna
them
say
when they
is
come to
that
use our
what you
schools.
see for graduation expense is an increase in the contract price for the convention center.
So that's something that we may be able to talk to
think
city
that-
council?
Well, the board may have that conversation with city council anytime it likes. Our negotiations are directly with the CVB over there, and we work directly with the convention center, so
Gotcha.
they kind of, Mike McGee and his team negotiate that price, and that's based on what we need and how long we're gonna use it, and all of the various things that come along with that. So I think their costs are just probably related to their employee cost increases, if I had to guess.
Right,
and
because we have to
inflation, and
cover the cost, the cleaning, all of those things. I'm just curious, when the city needs to have a meeting and uses one of our facilities, if we charge them for a profit or just the cost that it covers for our employees
So
to maintain.
just to be clear for everybody who's listening, we don't charge anybody for profit on the
That was
rental
my
of our
understanding,
facilities.
so.
City or otherwise, we charge cost.
Their budget that they're allotting to us goes back to them. It's a conversation that maybe those of us on the board can have with city council just to see if there's we have to cover the cost of the employees and that, but how much of a profit is appropriate? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Owens. Ms. Manning?
I have a request, as we're talking with community members about the budget and trying to talk about the different options, option 1, option 2. It's not accessible to them, these documents, the new ones, easily. So I was wondering if we might be able to get option 1 and option 2 put on our budget page, Dr. Spence, and maybe also this new budget balancing option as well, maybe compared, because the Xeon, we have it in the Xeon they can find, but the new information isn't on the website.
We can do that. It might take us a couple days because we've got to get it
Okay.
through ADA compliance,
Right.
but yeah, we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Great suggestion. Thank you, Ms. Manning. Ms. Anderson, sorry we didn't see your hand, but you're next.
Yeah, we can't, I cannot
short.
see anybody to the left of Dr. Spence.
Okay, you're next.
There, Orange Renee, y'all scoot back.
So I just wanted to say, how much I appreciate, the effort that you all have gone to ensure that we can go to the option 1, because we have heard quite a bit, from our constituents out there that they wanted us to go to option 1. And I know that it took some delving into this and some hard work, but I appreciate all that you've done, and our teachers now know that they're being listened to, and we heard from quite a few of them. So appreciate that, and I just wanted you to know that how much the teachers will appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brown?
Okay, so I want to reiterate, I do appreciate, option one, and thank you for all the work that you've done. I'm happy about that. I've heard a lot from constituents in my email, but I've heard a lot from constituents out and about that this step pay thing is an issue, so I'm glad we're fixing that. I have a question, and I don't know who I'm asking the question to, but, I want to go back to the administrative assistants. There's 3 for elementary, 1 for middle, and 1 for high school. So I guess there was an explanation sent to me that it was because of free and reduced lunch requirements. Can you maybe explain that a little more?
So it was for several factors, the first of which is getting closer to the SOQ numbers for a new assistant principal. As we get closer to that, we try to provide additional administrative support, but you saw there were a couple of factors in there. Free and reduced lunch is one, so we do consider that, but also special education is another one. So if we have high caseload of special education, it takes up a lot of administrators' time. This was in an email response. Well, that's free and reduced. Yeah, so essentially, that would impact our Title I schools when we're talking about free and reduced lunch. So I think there was one other factor that we listed, but Matt, you want to talk a little bit about how your team looks at how they deploy it?
Sure, and one other area that he didn't cover is things like accreditation standards. How are we doing in certain graduation requirements? How are we doing with our gap groups that we're trying to improve student achievement on? I hinted on this a little bit during the Title IX presentation that job responsibilities for administrators have really increased over the last several years, and as a result of that, this level of support allows us to get into classrooms, support teachers, observe instruction, handle discipline, and provide that additional support. But it's beyond just the free and reduced. Dr. Spence covered several of them. We typically take a look at all of those factors. We sometimes look at the experience of the administrative team as well to say if we've got groups, I think you may have heard this, Ms. Brown, earlier in the year, but we have 54 new administrative teams across all of our schools. And with that requires a level of support and assistance that these administrative assistants provide. Another factor on administrative assistance is it allows us to build our bench as well for future administrators as we start to have people retiring, that we have individuals who can fill those roles. During the year, a key component is we do not assign an administrative assistant until a teaching replacement is found. So this allows us to get ahead of it if this is approved in the budget to get those assigned and get a replacement for the teacher in there. Administrative assistants are on a teacher scale, they're not on an administrative scale.
Okay.
Kind of gave you a variety of things to think about there, but.
And then one other question. So there seems to be a pretty big pay discrepancy between the positions. Can you speak to that? So for Bayside High School, the administrative assistant is going to be $120,289, whereas Lansdowne Middle is $84,480. Can you speak to that?
I can't speak directly to what the big difference is. I'll talk to Crystal about that. Typically, you're looking at the level of pay for a different pay scale from where you're on high school to elementary, but I'd have to get back to you on that one, Ms. Brown. I don't have a direct answer for that. You're welcome.
Ms. Weems?
Yes, Ms. Woodhouse, I had a question that came up to me just Friday, actually, and I meant to email it in. I'm sorry about that. But I was in one of the schools, and somebody made the comment that custodians at the elementary level get paid less than if they go to the middle or high school level. Is that true, and if so, why?
No, ma'am.
Okay,
Actually,
okay. I had
there's-
never heard of it, and I was wondering why.
Right, there's one scale for our custodians, so I'm not for sure where that may have
Okay.
come up, and maybe they can reach out to us. But we do have 10-month and 12-month
Right.
custodians, which could factor into the difference that they might be seeing. But there's one
Okay,
scale
good.
that addresses
Okay, because
all
I
of
couldn't
them.
quite understand why that would be, so I just wanted to ask it to make sure. Okay, thank you.
Not a problem.
Is there anybody else? Okay, then I'm gonna wrap it up.
Still got the CIP.
Oh, no, wrap this up and then we'll let CIP, sorry. I'm gonna do CIP, I promise, Jack. First of all, I want to thank all of my, colleagues on the school board for your fantastic questions. I appreciate that you did that and you looked so thoroughly through it. This has probably been the most we've had in the past, I don't know how many years, because I've been here a long time too, not sitting up here on the dais, but sitting back there. So I appreciate you going through it and combing it and asking the questions you did. And thank you to the administrators, to Crystal Pate, to Ms. Woodhouse, to Dr. Spence, to Don, to all of you guys that we've asked for the very thorough explanations that we could understand. And to make us be able to understand it, because it is a very difficult document and it's a lot. So thank you, and I especially like this last question, Ms. Manning, that you asked for us to do, because I think that's really important for everybody to see. So thank you so much. There's been a lot gone into, Crystal meeting with several of us together. I'm sure other people have met and talked too, so there's been a lot of work in this, like it always is, but even more so this year. And I'm thrilled with this option one, because I couldn't vote for anything else but that, just like the teacher said they wouldn't accept anything else. So thank you so much. We so appreciate it. Okay. Our CIP,
Good evening. All right,
Mr. Jack Freeman.
so I'm just going to start by touching on a couple of items that we talked about last week, because I know that some of them were done without slides, so I'm going to do a couple of visuals. So let's start off with funding and inflation, to have some graphics around it again. So this is a slide that you've seen before. So this is the one that we showed you in the years preceding COVID, and we're doing this for consistency so you can see what we were sharing as far as projected inflation. And so in the original years, the dashed line that you can see that's a relatively straight line was the one that was presented, and it was presented as a visual representation of the inflation rate. And then you could kind of see in the bar graph there that it's not really linear how the cost per square foot in the state of Virginia for schools has increased over time. So that's when we added that kind of visual bend in the curve to represent that inflation began accelerating more in the about the 2016 timeframe. So we were projecting a higher inflation rate. And so you can kind of see where we built, this is the high school slide, so you can see we built Renaissance and Kellerman there for, on average, cost per square foot at the state for those years. And we projected at that time that Prince Anne High School was going to be on the order of about $450 a square foot, and that's based on a visual representation. And that was shocking for everybody in the school board at the time, because the memory goes back to Kellam. If you look at Kellam, that was on the order of about 200 square feet. This is inflation. This is how compounding interest, and this is how inflation works. So since that time, we went out and we contracted an expert to look at, okay, well, let's look at actual inflation. Yeah, that was a visual representation. So back in 2019, so again, 2019, if you look at that on the order of $350 a square foot, state average for high schools. So you start with $350 a square foot. And then the actual inflation measured in 2020, 2021, 2022, you can see there in that column under Virginia K-12 construction. So those are schools in the state that projected that. And those numbers are actually kind of measured out a little bit, because you could see some things that are much higher than those numbers, which wouldn't be reasonable planning numbers to be able to use. So that's what they ultimately settled on. And then projecting out going forward, you can see from 2023 and beyond, the expert kind of metered that down to a 6.18 moving out to 2026. So we had projected a cost per square foot on the order of, visually in that graph, about $450 a square foot, and COVID substantially impacted the way inflation has affected all construction. So that's where you can see we got to, if we're bidding in 2025, that's $575 a square foot. That's how that number is arrived at. So and then you look at roughly a decade, and you can pick any of these numbers and see what does that inflation rate look like over a decade. It's roughly doubling the cost per square foot every 10 years, roughly. That's the cost challenge that we're working, one of the cost challenges that we're working with. Well, how do you cover costs? You cover it by putting in funding. So here's the historical projected funding that we talked about last week, and this is the slide that I was trying to talk to, but wanted to bring back the visual representation. So roughly about 2008 is when the lottery funds, which were previously designated to be used for school construction, were incorporated into the general fund of the state. And that's where you see the drop-off related to funding from roughly that 2009, 2010, and on down. And that linear 5% inflation rate, which we now know is under what would occur, what that essentially means is everything from 2008 and beyond is the reduced buying power that we have based on the way that we have funded schools. And that's largely due to when that funding was no longer designated for school construction, there was no accommodation made to account for that. So you can see in 2006, 7, 8, and 9, those three bars, they're at $60 million of funding. Look all the way over to the right of the chart, and you can see that 2023, 24, up through 28, it's, did I say 60 million? 60 million, so it's essentially $60 million. So there has been no increase since the late 2000s in the way that we fund our projects. In addition to that, there's a deficit. You can kind of see it drop below the $60 million for a number of years in between there. So again, visual math on the order of hundreds of millions of dollars that we are less buying power since the 2008 timeframe, and there is no projected improvement for that. That's the challenge. We've got this inflation that we're working with, and funding is not there to account for what had been removed back in the 2008 timeframe. That's the challenge we're working with. So with that, what that creates is, so now we have good numbers to be able to account for inflation. So applying that inflation to when we're going to be able to effectively bid projects. So you look at Prince Anne High School. So when you increase the requirement for that to bid potentially in 2025, that was in the currently approved CIP, so the one that you approved last year, that was going to be fully funded by 24-25. That's no longer the case. So now we need to apply that same money, and there's no increase in money, so you have to take money from other projects and move it into Prince Anne High School in order to be able to get that fully funded. So you can see that where we get that thing fully funded about 2 to 3 years later than the previous CIP. So that now affects Betty F. Williams. You go down to Betty F. Williams, and that was previously projected to be funded 2 years after Bayside High School. So in the 26, 27 timeframe is when that's going to be fully funded. Now it's going to take us the entire 6 years of the CIP to get that fully funded. So additionally, now you have to look at, that money's got to come from somewhere. So now you go down to Bayside High School. In the currently approved CIP, the number that is in the 6-year appropriations, so what would have been covered in the 6 years, is $88.5 million. So this year, because we had to move money into the other ones, now that makes Bayside High School at roughly $29 million. So it went from 88.5 to roughly 29 million that we put in the 6-year CIP. So going back to the question, so what that ultimately does is it pushes Bayside High School out to a potential bid date in 2034. And you can see that the cost per square foot between 2025, $575 per square foot, and 2034, almost double at $986 per square foot. That's the math problem related to when you have increasing inflation substantially with no accommodation related to the way that it's funded. That's what we're working with. Okay, so that's the funding and inflation part of the question that was posed last week. So the other one was related to square footage needs and how do we account for what the square footage needs are. And there's discussion related to what's the current square footage and what are other square footage calculations. So in 2007, Virginia Beach City Public Schools completed a long-range facility master plan, which identified several high schools in need of replacement through the CIP School Modernization Program. This document was updated through the 2017 Long-Range Facility Master Plan document. Both the facility condition and educational adequacy of the existing school buildings were assessed. Under educational adequacy, Princess Anne High School received a rating of 41%, and Bayside High School received a rating of 67%. Related to space availability for educational programs and other needs for the curriculum programs. From 2008 until February 2008 to May 2008, a committee worked on an important task of developing high school educational specifications. The Working Steering Committee represented a broad cross-section of school community, including students, parents, teachers, administrative staff, and community members. The committee was responsible for reviewing demographic and facility data, examining future trends that would impact educational facilities, and developing the high school educational specifications regarding the future high school facility needs of the division. In 2009, the resulting Virginia Beach City Public Schools High School Education Specifications document were completed as a result of this work, which made recommendations for new high school standards looking towards the future high school needs in the year of 2030. The proposed square footage for the replacement of schools in the CIP proposed in FY24 and earlier CIPs planned for these replacement consider these recommendations. So this is work that was done, and Ms. Weems, I actually saw you were on the school board back when this when work was done. I think you're the only standing member that was around when it occurred. So what you see up here is a example of potential high school needs that were developed as part of the education specifications. So this considers 1,800 students as part of these recommendations based on square footage. And you can see the areas that are included on the left and over on the right, the square footage, the estimated square footage that's related to that. Now, where we are in the process with the CIP in front of you is making reasonable estimates so that when we get to design, that we can reasonably build the school buildings that we need as part of the design program. It's not to have all of those answers in advance, it's to reasonably be able to accommodate the needs of the school when we get into the design phase. So you can see up at the top, the learning communities. You can see a special needs group that they plan for. So our students with disabilities, only 3 that are planned there. We know Princess Anne High School coming up next. We have a designated facility that is intended for our students with disabilities with the greatest need. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So we know that that number isn't accurate. Technical and career education. We've had substantial amount of discussion about where we want to move as a community, and we've had a proposal to be able to develop a joint committee in order to be able to make our career and technical education curriculum more robust and our output better. So there's we need to account for information there. I'll take you down to the subtotal where it says building services, circulation, and restroom. This, again, was the 2009 timeframe. We had a lot of our mechanical systems on the exterior of the building. With improved building standards, the way we build buildings, we move those to the interior of the building. They improve life cycle cost of those, and it improves our ability to be able to work on those. So that needs to be increased from what was done back in the late 2000s. So when you apply those standards to Princess Anne High School and what we might project, and again, remember, we're trying to make a reasonable estimate for what might be needed so that when we get to the design phase, we can then hone that in and say, this is exactly what we need. And ideally, there's still enough money in there, and if we can make that better in the design phase, we can scope that down and save money and then potentially move that to another project. What is much harder is if you scope it down too much in advance and you don't have enough money, that's a bigger problem to have to deal with. All right, so with that as a backdrop, I kind of set up the students with disabilities so you can see the special needs CSEP category. In our conversations with them, the reasonable number to calculate is an additional 11 spaces for Princess Anne High School, based on what they need. In addition to the space needed for those students, so we're often teaching, servicing adult students over there, and they come with equipment needs. So this isn't just space in a classroom, it's also being able to accommodate the equipment that is needed for these students. So we're estimating, we don't know, there's a degree of uncertainty that goes with that number 14 that we have in there. It's a reasonable estimate to be able to get us in a good ballpark that we could get to a better planning number when we get into the design phase. Career and technical education, we added an additional 2 spaces in there. Again, reasonable ballpark, but we are not quite sure what's going to come out with the committee work that's going to be done on how we can improve our already current career and technical education programs. But we believe that it is prudent to include additional capacity in there to be able to account for what might be done. Moving down, and I didn't set this up so well in the previous slide, you can see that they added an NJROTC down at the bottom as kind of an alternate. Well, we know at Princess Anne High School, they do have an NJROTC program, so that's included in 3,100 square feet. And then the last one, the building services, again, I'm gonna go back to the previous slide. You can see the number 42% there. In this one, we're including 45%. So partly because you're moving the mechanical systems inside the building, and partly because when you go to our special needs category up there, our students with disability, when you're accounting for restrooms and other facilities related to that, it's more space for those. So you need to reasonably estimate and account for those. So that's why we've included as a 45% rather than a 42%. In addition to that, there are exterior buildings that are not included in that other calculation, so we need to account for those. And so those are the athletic storage, public restrooms, and concessions. Again, reasonable estimate for what might be needed for those. So you add all those together, and it's about 44,000 square feet. So our validation, 344,000 square feet, thank you. So our validation of the 342,000, which is in the current CIP as a planning factor, it matches up. It's a reasonable estimate for what might be needed to be able to meet our educational standards, and it is based on a study that was done that had a good level of detail of what might be needed in our high schools moving forward. Now, that being said, information changes all the time. And that can be accounted for in the design phase of the process. But our recommendation is it would not be appropriate to try and do anything substantially different than what our information and data indicates here. That's why in the current CIP, it's 342,000 square feet for the project. In addition to those things, other considerations just to remember about Princess Anne High School, and all of these things are integrated. When you start talking about design and what things are affected by a site. So additional things to think about for Princess Anne site is it's in a wetlands area. It's a very unique space, a very unique property. There may be costs associated with where that building is physically located. In addition to that, there's a pump station that is on that property that we are responsible for, and likely we're going to have to pay the bill on that. Could be on the order of 2.5 million. That we need to have in there. That needs to be accounted for. I mentioned up front that the planning factor for these was 1,800. We know that the student projection is probably closer to 1,650. So when you look at those classrooms, also remember that we have an IB program that's in that school right now. What's significant about the IB program? Well, there's fewer students per classroom in that. So that calculation needs to be worked in there. So the balance of 1,800, planning for 1,800 versus 1,650, that's very challenging in a document like that to be able to tease out what that number might look like. Is it a reasonable calculation to be able to have 1,800 students based on all those factors? It's reasonable that that's the case because there's so many uncertainties that are there with this building. That can all be worked out in the design process. And if we find savings, remember that number we said, hey, we had to move all that money to Prince Anne High School? If we find that we're able to save money and be able to do it smaller and less expensive, that can all be moved down in the next project and be able to do that a little bit sooner. So this goes into the background of why it was 342,000 square feet used as a calculation. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions.
Ms. Melnick?
Okay, so I'm just really happy. This has been a very frustrating process for me, kind of muddling through all of this discussion because there's so much I understand and so much that the public does not, including our counterparts on city council. So I'm advocating for nothing here other than to just say, thank you for bringing up the design phase and what can and can't be done before we move into the design phase. So I'm glad you brought forth the statement of reasonable estimates. And then you move into the design phase where you do your design charrettes and you do all of those things. And then the value engineering occurs, right? And what I've heard from city council is having multiple designs come forward. And that really frustrated me because that's just not how this business operates. It's not the way things are done. And I quite frankly likened it to the Three Little Pigs, right? You build a school out of straw, sticks, and bricks. And so I just really wanted my colleagues to really understand the process. And I think this is the first time that it's been clearly stated that there is a step to all of this, and that the value engineering doesn't come until after you have plans, as you just noted. As you noted, I'll leave it there without going. Mine's really just a statement out of frustration, listening to all of this and watching the price per square foot grow as it does. I don't know what else to say other than, we had an opportunity and now the board can see how long it's actually going to take.
Ms. Martin?
Mr. Freeman, I remember, I think 9 of our schools are emergency management shelters. So am I to understand this building services line item does not include any potential increased power loads if we're going to shelter folks, feed folks, no special ingress egress for food drop-offs? Does this include a hurricane rating for the structure itself? It kind of makes me think about your comment about, Ms. Owens, about they're charging us for graduation space. But here we are offering up 9 schools for emergency management without compensation, without the appropriation in this budget. I assume those things would be added on during the design process?
Yes, ma'am, and I'm glad you brought that up. That is in fact the case. So for example, Killam High School, Category 2 Hurricane Shelter, and that is part of the process when we design our buildings of, all right, where do we need additional hurricane shelters? And that would be part of the process that we would go through. So there is a potential that this would be identified as a hurricane shelter and have that need. In addition, some of the things that I didn't mention up front, but I'll mention it here is, again, when we do comparison with other schools across the state, things to remember. So hurricane shelter is one, and we'll stay on the fact that we're a coastal city and the things that come with being a coastal city, which means you typically have more wear and tear on your buildings related to that. So you need to be able to account for that in the expenditures related to the building and make sure that we're designing buildings that are sustainable in that regard. But your point is spot on that there is a potential that will get an added cost when we go into the design phase for this building, or requested add-on cost. One final thing that I'll say that is unique to our buildings as well is typically when we go in, in recent years, when we go in and we do new construction, we know that we have a flooding problem. And we're spending large amounts of money in the city of Virginia Beach to account for flooding. We have exceeded standards related to water management, and we leave our areas better than what they started because we look at how we manage water and we put the expense in so that we have mitigated those things as part of construction and not pushing those costs onto someone else.
Okay, thank you so much for that explanation. That helps me kind of understand there's some other additional unfunded costs that come in here. And to my fellow board members and Madam Chair, if we think about the number of multifamily complexes being built in the area around Princess Anne, it's my expectation that this would probably become a very important piece of community infrastructure in the long term. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Manning?
Thank you. So the proposal that's on the table with City Council tonight is the PPEA to design 3 schools for $15.4 million. But correct me if I'm wrong, is it 30% design? That's what it gets us?
30% design on those 3 schools, yes.
So 30%. So we'll still owe another 30 million for design for those 3 schools, correct? I think that's.
I think I
budgeted
know
in
what you're
here.
asking, and I don't know that the math works out that way. So the way that the PPA is designed is they would, throughout the course of that, if we were to get to an end agreement in the development of a comprehensive agreement, the end result of that would be after about a year, we would have 3 buildings at 30% design. And then it would then go through a process where it would need to be able to make it through staff. And so it would include those designs. And in addition to design, it would have a guaranteed max price and all of the other factors that would be considered for, all right, does it make more sense to try and go including debt service and other items which are a concern for everybody in the city, including city council, in conversation we've had with them. So we would need to evaluate that as a staff. We would need to work with city staff to determine whether we believe this was a better method than a design bid build to be able to move forward. And what that means is, do we believe that it would actually provide cost savings? Do we have a method that we could pay for it under all of the criteria that would need to be able to meet? And then if we did make it through that, then it would come to the school board for the school board to approve or disapprove. And if it made it through the school board, then it would go to the city council for them to approve or disapprove. If it were disapproved at that point in time, which I think is your question, we would still own the 30% designs on the 3 different schools at that point in time. You mentioned what it cost us another 15 million beyond that. I don't know that.
We've budgeted 45 million for the design of the 3 schools. So I'm assuming that the 30% would be 15 million. So then we would have an additional 30 million. I'm sorry, we've budgeted 45 million for the design of the 3 schools.
Yeah, so additional 30 million.
So we still owe an additional, I didn't know if because this kind of came out for me in our CIP meeting. I didn't realize that when it was first presented to us. So I didn't know if the board was aware that this just gets us 30% design, not the whole design.
For the PPA, correct?
Right, correct, yeah.
Correct.
And I really appreciate your explanation on how you came up with the square footages. I appreciate that. And I understand that Princess Anne has some unique needs, especially with the CSEP program. So I would expect that to be a little bit bigger than some of the other high schools. But again, you compare it with other high schools, because other high schools have the same needs that we do other than the special programs like Princess Anne. So I'll compare Bayside High, that does not have that special program, and compare it to a couple of the new schools that are just being built in Henrico at 265,000 square feet, but their capacity is even higher at 2,028 square feet. So again, this is my concern with building these large schools, because there's maintenance costs, there's utility costs, there's a lot of additional costs that come with larger buildings. So again, I think we could be cutting this program funding number back by reducing the square footage, and
You know, that's my 2 cents of why I can't support the CIP as it's written right now, for those reasons. Thanks.
Jack, can you, I think you know I think I know the answer, but I want to be clear with you. In the proposed project cost, so the 250-some million for the PA high school project, that's not just construction costs, right? That includes site costs, that includes design and A&E costs, yes, the money's budgeted, but it's budgeted inside the project cost for design, for A&E. Yeah, okay. Just want to make sure everybody else did.
Ms. Owens?
I just wanted to make sure I was clear, and I don't have, I think it was in last week's presentation when we were looking at the cycle of updating our schools, that we have some schools that by the time we get to rebuilding them, we're looking at 100 years old, 120, 130 years out from the original time that they were built. And so it strikes me when you showed the comparison from the 2009 design and discussions about some of the changes that have been made from 2009 to now, about how the machinery is now stored inside buildings and how some of the different learning tools and equipment. And so I think it's important as a board that when we are considering what we are going to build here, it needs to serve our students today, tomorrow, and 130 years from now, because that's the next time they're going to get a new building. And so keeping that in mind of how teaching and how education has changed from 130 years ago, because we are planning for that as well. And so it's just something that I hope that we'll all keep in mind. Thank you.
Ms. Williams?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Freeman. Just a couple questions, because I'm not in the construction company, thank goodness. I mean, business. But why is the inflation per square footage more for schools versus the other two categories? Why is that? Why has that hit the schools more than private or?
So I would love to be able to answer that question. I don't think I'm the appropriate person to be able to answer that question. But, here's why. This is the observed rate of inflation, and we had an expert. We can reach out and ask why they project that that's different. This is just measuring. This is what the cost is related to that. It's a great question. Why? I don't want to hazard an answer because I don't. We
Yeah, I
can
mean,
see if there's a way to find out what that answer is.
It's just an interesting observation that it was a bit higher than the other two categories. I was just wondering why. Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine. Yeah, and I know, I appreciate you, reflecting, because I was there during some of this design. I was at Bayside High School when Tony Arnold and had the different groups, and they were sitting at tables and a lot of the community. So I did attend a lot of these, I guess, community gatherings of what you want in your school and how you see that and stuff, and it was very important. But I do have some heartburn on the size of these buildings too, because we certainly don't want to build a building that's then 30, 40, 50, 60% empty. We don't want to do that. And I look at it, because I remember going to these, and I remember people sitting at the table and kind of and this is the community one. So, it was kind of the mindset of, oh, wow, this is our, wish list. They're going to build Bayside a school, so let's go for really what we want and need, sometimes. And I kind of equate that to if my husband and I are building a house and someone's paying for it, I'm going to have extra space. I'm going to have huge walk-in closets that I don't have because I live in a very old house. I'm going to have the heated floor. I may have tons of stuff, but then when inflation hits like it has, I may have to rethink that. And so I guess that's where I am. And I know you said we can do that later, you know, with savings, but, you know, when this wish list or design or specifications were made, it was a totally different ballgame than it is now. So, you know, that's just kind of a comment that I think that I have a problem with this, because I do think that we can trim and cut down, especially on some of these sizes. And again, not with special education and the wing on Princess Anne, but some of the other areas, because I think that it was done, you know, 10, 12, 13 years ago when we didn't have the problem. So I think that when you have inflation, you have to go back and say, you know, wait a minute, let's reevaluate those needs versus wants. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. May I respond to that? Sure. So, yes. And it is fully acknowledged the time frame that that was done, and conditions change over time. And how do we make decisions for how we move forward based on reasonable information that we received over time? We update our facilities master plan every 10 years, so we're due to update it, and that's going to tell us which buildings we believe are next based on various factors. It's reasonable to take another look at, all right, well, how are we going to do this? From a staff recommendation standpoint, it would not be a good recommendation if I can't base it, and I say I, what I mean is we, can't stand in front of you and look you in the eye and say, we have based our recommendation off of this, which is reasonable, the most recent information that we have to be able to bring forward to you, with a aspiration of how do we improve that over time, lacking a study. We can't produce a study like this, like that. But we can make reasonable recommendations, and then we can have an aspiration, and we can work on that over time in the right process. So I think we're all aligned that we want to be good stewards of taxpayers' money. We want to build the buildings that we need and nothing more to be able to accomplish the job that we're going to do. The best information we have available is what we're presenting to you. When we get better, updated information, that's what we will be presenting to you. Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Brown?
Okay, so, I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate everything that you have, brought forward, but this right here, we aren't being asked to vote on a design plan. We're being asked to vote on 3 schools. Is that correct, when this comes to a vote?
The project sheets that you have in there, correct. There are no designs for those schools.
So, you know, it sounds really nice that we could go back and change it around, but once I agree to this, I have agreed to this. I have some serious reservations, and I'm going to state these probably over and over again. Size, how it goes into our operating budget, the sustainability for our division as a whole, from a fiscal perspective going forward in the future. And, you know, I guess heartburn is a nicer word, but I'm concerned about it. And I do think that when we can build some schools that, you know, are a little more reasonably sized, that we can do more schools than this. And there's a lot of schools that, you know, this list goes back to 1996. It goes up to 2,115. There's a lot of schools in our division that aren't on this list at all. And so I feel like when we scale it back a little bit, we can serve more students. So it's not really a question, but when I was at the joint CIP Modernization Committee meeting, I was just watching. There was some discussion from the city manager about how this could jeopardize our city's AAA bond rating. And that would mean that our city's going to be paying more money for the same services. So I also think what's bad for our city is bad for our schools, and what's bad for our schools is bad for our city. Can you maybe speak to how this impacts the bond rating?
So that CIP that you have in front of you, that is based on design bid build, zero impact on the bond rating. The discussion was related to the PPEA and when you package schools together and how you pay for it. And the discussion related to the bond rating is how much debt, and Crystal, you might come up and have to take over here for me, but when you take three schools and compress them together, the funding need is going to be greater year over year, and how close is that going to get to their debt metrics? Now, the concern that was expressed was not that we are going to, but it's could potentially. And then, so for example, if they were to approve the interim agreement, that would be part of what would be studied over the course of the year as we're developing the comprehensive agreement of, well, how does this get packaged? How does it affect the metrics? And their Davenport is a group that they've hired to be able to work with them on looking at their debt metrics. We've had positive experiences that we could probably bring them into the conversation and get an expert look to be able to say, if you do these things, here's where it gets and related to the debt metrics. So you can then make a call of, oh, that's either it exceeds it or it gets uncomfortably close to it, or no, that's well within capacity. And an advantage of having somebody like Davenport be involved is it's an independent body that could be able to reasonably say, hey, you've got room here, or hey, there's just not enough room to be comfortable with exceeding that. And that goes into, if you do these things, it could potentially affect your bond rating, or it will affect your bond rating, and clearly that's not what we want to do. But that would need to be studied as part of, if they approved the interim agreement, to be able to work on that over the course of the next year, to then be able to develop a recommendation based on what was learned.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Franklin?
Well, Ms. Brown stole my thunder, actually. But I was just going to ask you, Mr. Freeman, just to kind of explain, because we have heard concerns from City Council. But I just wanted to, before I say that, because she had presented that, but I do want to say that that is a fair statement that you had made previously, that, we have to explore all of the different estimations that we have for what the schools are going to need and look like. Because, at one point, I mean, certainly, I went to school in the 80s, and I would have never thought we would ever get rid of lockers, right? I mean, who would have ever thought we would get rid of lockers back then? Or not have 100-pound backpacks, and those type of things. So, I mean, definitely needs change for sure. And right now, we're doing our best guess. But you know what they say about best laid plans, so, there's no way for us to ever be able to perceive what might happen 100 years from now. But right now we can use our best guess on figuring out what we can do in the future to be, have this division ready in 100 years from now as well. But I do think that I would like to have you just comment again on the concerns because we've heard it from several city council members about the bond rating and why you feel like that the PPA is such a good recommendation for not only our division, but also for the city in the future.
So to be clear, nobody is recommending that we continue with the PPEA right now. What we recommended approving to go to an interim agreement, which the school board concurred with that approval, and you voted back in August, end of July, August last year, to be able to move to the next step. So I'm going to pause. No. I'm saying that I appreciate it because I want to make sure that we're clear with everybody. So there have been other unsolicited PPEAs that have come to Virginia Beach. None of them ever made it to school board because it didn't make sense. The proposal that we got didn't make sense. This one, when we received it, it had promise. So we went through the steps and went through the process, and it kept making it to the point of it seems to still have promise. So up until this point, it seems to still have promise. At the end, if the city council were to approve the interim agreement, what we would be able to do is we would be able to look at essentially a quote. That's what when we say a comprehensive agreement, it's essentially a quote. Here's the quote that can be build these three buildings in this period of time with this effect on debt metrics, have it all included. You can take this alternative and you can see what that alternative is with the guaranteed maximum price. Or you can take the alternative, which is design bid build, which is these are the estimated inflation costs. These are the estimated years they're going to be built. And on a date, you go in and you open up envelopes and you see what the low bid is. And you get the low bid. So it's an opportunity to be able to compare, hey, pretty good solid information to a design bid build process where we're estimating for Bayside High School out to 10 years for what that might cost. Hopefully did I cover the elements of the question that you were asking?
Yes, and also the fact that, they were, I've also heard concerns that, we didn't know about, what the other bid looked like. And I think that you just stated that really well, that it wasn't up for discussion because of the fact that it just wasn't even a reasonable consideration.
The previous unsolicited
yeah,
PPEAs, correct.
Yeah.
We wouldn't recommend something if it wasn't going to provide value to Virginia Beach City Public Schools in the city.
Right. So, thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
Yes, ma'am.
Man, I'm not sure I want to make sure we get that clear. So I think, your question was, you were saying you had heard some concerns about why didn't we see the other offer on the PPEA? And that's because that's how the process is designed. The process is not designed to be a design build bid process. It is designed to put it out there for any of the offers, and then those offers are reviewed, and the best possible package for the school board is the one that gets brought forward as the preferred offer. This is all laid out in the PPA, which is a federal act which allows for these public-private partnerships. But that entire process is laid out. We've followed it very carefully. We updated, as you all know, the board along the way. This is where we are in the process. This is where we are in figuring out who the preferred offer is going to be. And then we came back and said, this is who the preferred offer is. We give you the reasons why. But once you have the preferred offer, you don't go back and start talking to people about why you go with the other offer. You talk about why you did go with the preferred offer, and that's just how that process works.
Thank you for that, and I misunderstood that part of the question, so thank you for clarifying that piece. Something that's also worth noting, when you look at the CIP and what is in the CIP, you notice in addition to Prince Anne High School, Betty F. Williams, and Bayside High School, there are a number of other projects that are needed to be able to maintain our facilities. And that's a substantial piece of the work. So we talked to you in the fall about roofs, HVACs, and foundations and the challenges we have there. And we are working on getting adequate funding for those pieces. And in addition to those, we're trying to capture as much other money as we can and applying for grants that are related to that. But all these other things are work that needs to be done on our schools that are funded through the CIP and are important for our ability to be able to maintain our schools. And as you probably are likely aware, that our summer times that's the busy time for our facilities and maintenance team, because that's when students aren't in school, and that's when we're getting a lot of our work done. This is a large amount of money that supports that work that gets done on those things over the year.
Okay, Ms. Anderson?
So, I believe we did our last, I guess it's called projections.
Facilities master plan?
I was on the board then, and I think it was 2011 or 12 we did it. Or maybe it was 12, no, I'm sorry, 12 or 13. It was about 10 years ago we did it. We're due to do it again,
Is
correct?
this the long-range facility master plan?
Yes, right.
We did one in 2017. We're due for another one in 2027. So right about 25, we'll start the planning for that process.
So, but I went to several of those committee meetings. But what I'm seeing in the future, what it says projects not fully funded in this, we have schools that were built in the 70s that we're looking to replace. But we also have schools, at least one that I'm aware of, that was built in the 60s, Allenton Elementary, that's not even on this list. It was built, I believe, in 1965 or 66. It's not even on this list. So I don't know whether we're deciding that Allenton's not worthy, but when we start doing that again, I plan to go around the community over in Allenton and saying, you know, you need to get to these meetings, because people who tend to speak up and saying, oh yeah, we want our school replaced, et cetera, those are the schools that are listed on here. And, you know, we need to make sure that we at least go to First Colonial and have a meeting there and make sure that those communities, because I mean, when you have schools that are built in the 60s and they're not even on the list, that bothers me. I just wanted to point that out, but that there are schools on here, White Oaks, but for example, White Oaks Elementary, the original opening date was 1978. Right now on this list, it's not scheduled to be replaced until 2115. This is still, you know, almost 100 years from now that we'll think about replacing it. Yet Allenton's not even on the list at all. So I just wanted to point that out. We need to do that. We need to do that again. That long-range projection list needs to be updated.
So yes, ma'am, every 10 years. And it's scheduled for 2027, so we'll start the process in 2025. I mean,
Okay.
if I may, I'm going to address one of the comments.
And in 100 years, who knows? Maybe some of these schools won't be needed. You know, maybe we'll have had to close some schools by then. Who knows?
So on that long-range facilities master plan, one of the things it's based on is our facility condition index. So our goal, our intention, our guidance is that we're going to come to you with factual information related to the condition of our facilities and recommendations for where things get included in prioritization. We appreciate community feedback. Community feedback is important, but the suggestion is, hey, if you come to the meetings and talk the loudest,
Right.
that you're going to move to the front of the line. We're going to present you information that's based on factual information related to the condition of the facility and where we believe it falls in the priority list.
Okay.
If
well,
anybody else
I
would like to take it,
understand
I was
that.
not around for the last one. If anybody else wants to add on to that.
I was. Go ahead.
Yes, I've been involved with several of these, and I think our process of long-term facility, the condition index and the whole process is absolutely phenomenal. It is not, oh, build me a new school, woe is me, my school it looks horrible, because then everybody would be there. It is on so many criteria. The wear and tear of the buildings. Some of our buildings have a lot more wear and tear because they have a lot more community events in there. You know, depending on where they're located. The special education needs the wear and tear. How many events? I mean, it is just so specific. And so I hold that process very, very high. And it is not about, you got to build me a school because my kids or grandkids go there and it looks really bad. You know, it is a process, and I have to keep explaining this to the community because they do. You do get upset if your school. I mean, you know, my kids went to Bayside High School. You know, yeah, come on. But I know that we're in a line where the process has been done, and those buildings that are where they are. So if you don't see your building up there, it doesn't mean you haven't, you know, been vocal enough. It doesn't mean that we overlooked you. It means that other buildings are at need it more right now. And so I just want to clear that up because the process is very, very, very good.
And just a couple of additions to that. So one, the process is not conducted internally. We work with architects and building designers to come in and make those assessments with us and with our community. So we do get third-party eyes on that to come in and say, okay, and like, for example, you know, and we look at a lot of different things. So we look, you know, a lot of people are going, why did you just rebuild John B. Dye, but you knocked down and totally redid Thorogood? So we look very carefully at the existing facility. Can we refinish that building versus knock one down and have to start all the way over? So those are all part of that process. But the other thing I wanted to say, because I wanted to make sure it didn't get lost, we do value the community's input in that conversation. One of the reasons you see this modernization program in the next few schools front-loaded with high schools is that was the clear preference of the community during the 2017 process. We heard it over and over and over again in every single session. We need to focus on our high schools. We need to focus on our high schools. And that's why you see the high schools really front-loaded in this process. and I just wanted to put that out as an example of the community feedback impacting. So there is impact from these conversations. It's just that it's not build my school first. It's a differently designed process to get at what are our priorities as a city when it comes to our schools. Align that to which of the schools our architects are telling us this one really kids shouldn't be in, that kind of conversation, and it doesn't have the bones that it needs to support a modern educational program or whatever that is. And then we, come back and talk about that. But it's a really thorough and thoughtful process. We'll look forward to engaging with the board in that again.
Ms. Martin?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand what we're voting on when we vote for the CIP. So what we're essentially doing is agreeing to a few capital improvement projects, looks like HVAC, and then to put some money basically in a savings account for these future builds. So we're just kind of deciding where the buoys are going to be. But can we change this in the future? Let's say we get a Category 4 hurricane and we've got to reprioritize some things. So this isn't set in stone. It's what we're kind of saying, these are what we agree to obligate for future years, but that may change. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. So for one, it's good for 1 year. So we come back to you every year with a new one. So for example, like I briefed you, and I'll just use the one example that Bayside High School in your currently approved is on the order of 88.5 million. And that has been substantially reduced based on what we have learned over the course of this year. So that's just an example of, yes, it does get adjusted. To your point of mid-year, are there things that can happen that cause us to adjust mid-year? Yes, and there is a process by which we can get approval from school board and potentially city council based on the dollar value that's in there.
Okay, so Madam Chair, so what we would be voting on is, if I can read this, it's a little bit hard for me, 62 million, is that what I'm seeing on slide 18? It's everything for those 5 years, but the appropriation for this coming year would be
You're talking about this slide right here?
62.8?
So for this year, 62.8, and this is the alternative A in there. So
Okay.
62.8 for this 1 year, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to understand there was some flexibility if things change in this piece. Thank you.
Yes.
Which I may point out, as you noted at the bottom of that in your book, this funding source alternative aid includes 21-22 reversion funds not yet approved by the city council, which they are voting on tonight. Okay? We're hearing it's gonna be voted on, but we'll get it, but we don't know yet, because we haven't got a vote. But yes, so that's why you see both of those alternatives. Everybody clear with what we're gonna be voting on when we do go to a vote? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Thank you for all of that hard, mind-boggling, millions and millions and millions of dollars. I remember going to those meetings too at Bayside High School, sitting there with city council members, with Tony, with the group, what was it? What was the name of the group again? I can't even remember.
Young?
That
HBA.
presented, that we outsourced out to come in and do all of that.
HBA and DeYoung were both.
Yeah, and it was very, very, I think we had a meeting 3 or 4 or 5 times that year. It was a lot. It was a lot. And there were several tables of people there from the community, from the city council, and it was very informative and very eye-opening. So yes, thank you.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to adjourn now. It's 6:58. Thank you very much for everybody for coming and listening in.